recently got to have a sneak preview of the first 25 minutes or so of Spider-Man Miles Morales, the follow-up to 2018's Marvel's Spider-Man, coming to PS4 and PS5 as a PS5 launch title in November. As fans of Insomniac's take on the Spider-Man universe in the original game, we are super excited to see how the studio handles this next adventure starring Miles Morales, the kid arachnid who brings new powers, new perspectives, and new conflicts to the role of your friendly neighbourhood Spider-Man. Miles is now 1 year into the job as Peter's partner in crime fighting, and he's very much still learning the ropes. But the time has come for him to briefly step into the spandex shoes of New York's only Spider-Man when Pete gets called overseas with MJ. After checking out the demo, I chatted with Brian Horton, creative director of the game, and Cameron Christian, game director, to talk about what I'd seen. Here are some of the details you might want to know about. Potential spoiler warning if you plan on going into Spider-Man Miles Morales totally fresh, and an additional spoiler warning for some of the events of the original game. After the death of his father, Jefferson Davis, in the previous game, Miles and his mother Rio have moved from Brooklyn to East Harlem for a fresh start. According to the development team, Miles getting to know his new neighborhood and home is going to be a major theme of the game.
And after the events of the first game, when his father dies, his mother decides to move them to East Harlem, her childhood home. And he gets to experience a whole new part of the city that he may have visited, because it's his abuela's old apartment, but now he's living there and he's getting to learn what Harlem's all about, is his new home. And so I would say that a big part of this game is Miles getting to learn and love the people of Harlem as his own. And that's sort of one of the themes of our game is fighting for the people you love.
Sounds like a lot of people out there.
So, in the original game, Miles' dad, Jefferson Davis, was killed in action, sacrificing himself to save the lives of others. This is probably the biggest change between Insomniac's incarnation of Miles Morales and his comic book counterpart, where Jefferson doesn't die. Rio does, but she's later brought back to life, because, well, comic books. But anyway, Rio in Spider-Man Miles Morales is running for city council and directly opposing the definitely not shady Roxon Corporation's testing site in her childhood home of East Harlem, which will undoubtedly put her in the category of people Miles must fight to protect. But it also sounds like Rio should not be underestimated.
I'd say that is one of the big defining differences between comics lore and the game universe is the death of Jefferson Davis. Obviously, we love that character. He played a huge role in Marvel's Spider-Man, and he's got a huge impact on Miles Morales. I mean, Miles looked up to his father as a hero, right? And that's his example of a hero. Now we continue that hero through his parents with Rio Morales. She's an everyday hero. She's running for city council. And by them going from Brooklyn to Manhattan or to Harlem as a way to sort of add another level of complication to Miles' life, it really does send our story in a different trajectory. And I think it makes it, it sort of puts our Insomniac twist on the classic canon. But we're really excited about how much Rio's example inspires Miles. It's a big part of his journey of looking at what does it mean to be a hero. We can look at his mom, and his mom is fighting for the people she loves. She's fighting for her home of East Harlem. So that was a big unique thing that our writing team was passionate about, is making sure that Rio was a wonderful example for Miles to look at as another kind of hero.
Of course, Miles has a superpowered hero to look up to as well. The game begins with Miles and Peter working together as a prison convoy transports escaped criminals to the raft. And that includes Rhino, who, surprise surprise, breaks out and must be stopped by our web-slinging duo. Having two Spideys on screen at the same time allows for a lot of spectacle. As Rhino rampages through a shopping mall at Christmas, it's up to Miles to slow him as Peter grabs citizens out of harm's way, and comedy, as the pair pay a flyby visit to their biggest fan, J. Jonah Jameson. The direct interaction between Miles and Peter is nothing but sweet and supportive, but it's also short-lived, as Peter reveals he's off to Europe for a working vacation as MJ's photographer on a daily bugle assignment. Peter does take the time to set up a series of challenges for Miles and leave gifts for him before he jets off, but from that point onwards, Miles is on his own.
Dang, I'm late for Mom's rally.
Or, actually, not entirely alone, because he's supported by his very own guy in the chair, best pal, Ganke Lee. Not only has Ganke lived in Harlem his entire life, he's clued into Miles' new identity, and he can put his technical know-how to good use by designing suits, like the tracksuit, and even an app to help Miles respond to calls for help from the public.
Come on, we're gonna be late. Hey! Dude, I am so filling your suit with snow.
We always wanted to make sure that we recognized the mentorship component of Miles and Peter, but we also wanted to let Miles have his own space and figure out who he was on his own. So it actually was super important for us that Miles had to figure things out without his mentor. But that's where I think Ganke Lee plays a huge role in our story, because the rapport that they have as friends, more on a peer level, like they're at the same age bracket and they've sort of have similar interests. It allowed us to continue that rapport that we started with Miles and Peter. So I'm really excited for people to get to know Ganke. He's a super compelling character, and mechanically he's bringing something unique to the game because he invents this friendly neighborhood Spider-Man app, which allows the people of New York City to interface with Spider-Man directly. And I think that's a really great way for you, the player, and for Miles to get to learn Harlem.
Are you still wearing your suit?
Yeah, just in case.
It's possible that Ganke's app also plays another role in not having Spider-Man working directly with the NYPD as he did in 2018, a mechanic and plot point that some players criticized in the original game and one that would feel even more out of place now in 2020. Plus, neither Spidey has someone on the inside of the police force to help them out anymore, since Yuri Watanabe went rogue, or Wraith, if you will. Anyway, Ganke has essentially created an app that lets any New York citizen report a crime or call in a request with Spider-Man directly. And some of those requests, according to Brian Horton, will open up into fully fledged side quests.
The way the app works is he's created a platform for anyone to be able to report, it's citizen reporting, right? So you just, citizens say, hey, I've got this problem, I have this request, here's a crime. Anything that gets reported just instantly goes to the app, and all it does, all Ganke's code does for Miles is order it in such a way that the player can understand it. So the thing that's really kind of cool about that is you can see sort of distance, how far away it is in the city, and you can get an idea of like, well, this is a quest, or this is an activity, or this is a crime. So we started to try to categorize it in ways that the players can understand it, and each of these things are unique. But one thing that was really kind of cool is we invested in our quests to make sure that quests themselves actually have a continuing storyline. So as you start to dig into these quests across the game, new ones open up, and then they tell sort of a side story that goes along with the main story.
Okay, Pete. Yeah, I got this.
It's really exciting that we get to experience the vibrancy of New York and Harlem through not only the perspective of Miles Morales' Spider-Man, because, FYI, the entire map of the original Spider-Man PS4 game returns in Miles Morales, but there has been extra updated detail added to Harlem and East Harlem in particular, but through the eyes of Miles Morales, the teenager. Evan Narcisse, one of the narrative designers on the game, provided a brilliant insight into how Miles' experiences as a teenager are different from Peter Parker's. The teenage experience is totally different in 2020, and that is reflected in how Miles interacts with the world. Social media is, of course, a huge part of how he operates. It plays a role in the gameplay with Ganke's app, and it also plays a role in the story, with new character Danica Hart. In the comics, she's a YouTuber who ends up dating Ganke, but in the game, she's been reimagined as a popular podcaster who's coming out swinging for Spidey.
So she's a podcaster. She's going to comment on the things that she cares about, and she's an activist. She believes in ensuring that the people of the neighborhood that she lives in and the city she lives in have a voice, and she has a conversation with them. And she's a fan of Spider-Man, and I think that's in contrast to the other popular podcaster in Manhattan, which is J. Jonah Jameson.
Just the facts.
So we have Just the Facts and we have Danicast, right? And they really provide two different perspectives on the same situations. And I think, and that's something else that's really exciting, is we're able to take Danica from the comics lore and just like JJJ is different from comics as a podcaster, by putting them as sort of dueling podcasters, it made for an interesting dynamic.
Whoa! Let's not shoot each other, all right?
But on the subject of new characters, let's talk villains. First of all, there's the Tinkerer, a classic comic character who's been given a new twist. As a comic fan, it was really exciting to see Insomniac be given the freedom to put their own unique spin on Spider-Man characters and stories in the original game. And it looks like that's set to continue here.
This is a great opportunity to talk about our partners at Marvel Games. Bill and Eric and Tim, they all are really wonderful collaborators, and they are always giving us advice. It's like, hey, do your research, like understand the lore, but have fun with it, twist it, bend it, stretch it, like take chances. So they've been like Tinkerer is a great example.
Right.
Tinkerer is one of he's one of the oldest villains within the Spider-Man canon, not just in age, but just I think it was in the third, very early comics. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to take a new twist on the Tinkerer, and they were extremely open to the ideas we had to make a younger, more futuristic, version of the Tinkerer, who's actually on the front lines versus just behind the scenes making weapons. So that's what I would say is it's a tremendous amount of fun to dive into that very deep roster and bench of Marvel characters, but find the ones that really serve our story and serve Miles' journey. And that's really what it comes down to, is like, who are the best characters that can provide that pressure, that push and pull to make our story resonate.
Would you say she kind of has more in common with the Elijah Stern version of the character? Because, I mean, he was fired from Roxon, but he also had interaction with Aaron Davis. See, I'm getting into the weird, trying to trip you up stuff now.
Let me just compliment your knowledge. I mean, we did a lot of research on what the character would be, and without getting too spoilery, I would just say every single decision we made on this character was to ensure that it had some of the ingredients that we loved from the first Spider-Man game, which was villains that were complex and nuanced and had motivations and heroes of their own story. So that was a big motivator, is making sure our villains felt rich and had a full arc themselves. So that's where I'll leave it there.
I knew I wasn't going to get an answer on that, but I had to dig anyway. If you don't know who Aaron Davis is, do not worry, we'll get to him in a second. So, this incarnation of the Tinkerer is the leader of a new, high-tech criminal army called the Underground, who oppose the Roxon Corporation, but whose ideologies beyond that remain a mystery for now. On the Roxon side of things, their public-facing arm is being headed up by a man named Simon Krieger, voiced by the one and only Troy Baker. So, can we talk a bit about Simon Krieger? Because he's a character in the comics, but he's not a hugely recognizable one, and he's more closely tied with Iron Man. Would it be safe to say you guys are putting your own spin on him? Why did you choose him specifically?
Well, we did a lot of research on Roxon, and we were looking for a character that was going to tie to our main, I guess the driver of the plot, right? And so New Form was one of these things that we did research on, and we twisted what New Form was. New Form in our game is this clean, renewable energy, very powerful energy source, and we were looking for characters in the Roxon family for that. And Simon Krieger has a connection to New Form, so we just did a little bit of change and twist and put our Insomniac flavor on it, and we thought that was let's create this aspirational kind of character that is trying to profess this is the future of energy, and here I am out there, and I'm gonna transform energy for the world. So that's the pitch, right? And
yeah.
But what we can see very clearly, anyone can sort of peek through that veneer, and you see that there's something not quite right going on. So Simon Krieger, we wanted to bring a certain level of charisma, but also something underneath all of that you're not quite sure what's going on. So we were fortunate enough to be able to bring Troy Baker in to interpret that character, and I think he brought with all of his talents, was able to bring a very complex and nuanced character, but also someone that has a tremendous amount of charm and smarm at the same time. It's like it's a little bit of both. To bring what we think is a like you're saying, not a well-known character, but someone who is part of the Marvel lore.
Roxon is going to be a big adversary for Miles by the looks of things, and the company is smart enough and rich enough to develop ways of combating his unique set of powers, according to game director Cameron Christian.
So Roxon learns of his bioelectric attacks and starts designing tech to counter that. So like, for example, we have one of the enemies, which is a Roxon shield guy, and if Miles bioelectric venom punches in, they can absorb it into the shield and redirect it back, right? And so there's a lot of those things where we are pushing the high-tech nature of them and their reaction to Miles as he's growing this field.
Helix 2 is down.
More on Miles' abilities in a bit. First, let's go back to Aaron Davis quickly. Also known as Prowler, Aaron is Miles' uncle, a career criminal who is a source of a lot of conflict for pretty much every incarnation of Miles' Spider-Man. He's a huge part of his evolution, which you might already have gathered even if you don't follow the comics, if you've watched Into the Spider-Verse. Anyway, he's yet to be officially introduced in this universe outside of a very brief mention during a cutscene. And although Brian and Cameron didn't really want to talk too much about him during our chat, it seems like his existence in this game has been leaked by none other than Miles himself. In an Instagram story posted in late June that was very quickly removed, face model and voice actor for Miles, Najee Jeter, shared some very energetic takes from a session where he's talking to Mr. Davis.
I better check in with Uncle Aaron. Ring, ring, and he's like, yeah.
Hey, Mr. Davis. How are things looking now? Hey, Mr. Davis. How are things looking now?
I like the A of those two. That's perfect. And let me get the non-exerted one because I don't think the next one is for a while.
Okay. Hey, Mr. Davis. How are things looking now?
Presumably, he's talking to him as Spider-Man at that point. But just in case that left you with any doubt as to who they're talking about, someone else in the room also mentions him checking in with an Uncle Aaron. So that's pretty cut and dry confirmation if you ask us. But what we don't know yet is how Aaron will appear in Miles' life and how that will fit into the wider story with the Underground and Roxon. Watch this space, I guess.
I'm a count us lucky.
From the snippets of gameplay that have been released of Spider-Man Miles Morales so far, some fans have noticed that his swinging style differs from Peter's. It's actually a lot like his motions in Into the Spider-Verse, which maybe comes across as a little less coordinated, but is so full of personality. Is that kind of a way of having a newer Spider-Man without negatively impacting the gameplay?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it right there. It's like the whole story and even gameplay is about his growth and learning to be a Spider-Man, and him and the player going on that journey together. And so, you know, James Hamm, who was a senior animator on it, big proponent of getting not only the traversal animals to feel like he's not quite sure, he's a little, you know, gangly and trying to figure out how to do this. And both the traversal and combat moves really sold his like, hey, I'm just trying to figure this out and I'm learning it. I don't have any experience, while still keeping everything feeling tight and awesome controls-wise.
I'd also say it's a part of his style and expression. And Cam and I talked a lot with James about what do we want to double down on? What do we want to improve? Or at least push forward. And tricks were a big part of that. Like, Cam and I are huge fans of manual tricks because as you're swinging through the city, it's part of your expression. So you'll see a whole suite of new tricks, and we deepened the system that we established in Marvel Spider-Man. So that talks about the joy. Like, you are 17 years old. You have these tremendous new powers. What are you going to do while you're swinging around? You're gonna express yourself. And part of the be yourself is Miles figuring out, hey, I've got my own style, my own flavor, and that comes through in his combat as well as his traversal.
This Spider-Man is broken. I would like to exchange for new one. This one will do.
Miles, get out of here.
But as in the comics, Miles has a couple of abilities that Peter doesn't. First, there's his Venom Punch, which Miles discovers near the beginning of the game while trying to protect a beaten Pete from Rhino. Venom Punch actually doesn't contain any venom as a side note. It's a shock of bioelectricity that Miles Morales' co-creator Brian Michael Bendis once likened to getting kicked in the nuts. Fun fact. Anyway, Venom Punch causes Venom stun to enemies on impact in the game, and those stunned enemies take bonus damage from basic attacks. Venom Punch costs Venom power to perform, and you build that by attacking or dodging. It's powerful, but according to Cameron Christian, it won't make Miles invincible, as his enemies will find a way of countering it. Aside from Venom Punch, Miles also has Camouflage, which essentially means he can render himself invisible for short periods of time. During our demo, we saw that it runs on a short timer once activated, so you'll have to choose your moments to use this skill carefully. Even though stealth was a factor in the original game, the team say that this skill will change things up even further, as Miles can use Camouflage mid-fight to buy himself time to get out and reset the stage if things get too hairy, and he can take enemies out from walls or ceilings. In addition to his powers, Miles also has new gadgets, like a gravity well that works by dragging enemies into an area of effect and bringing them all together into one neat point for Miles to chain into a combo with a Venom Punch. Science.
Kill you!
Miles Morales is an amazing character with amazing stories to tell. We know that already, so I'm excited to see how Insomniac explores this new take on his Spider-Man. What was really lovely to see was that right from the beginning of the game, it's underscored how positive and encouraging the relationship between Peter Parker and Miles is. Peter already knows Miles is Spider-Man, but Miles still has a long way to go before he overcomes his self-doubt and accepts himself as Spider-Man too. I love Peter Parker because he's an earnest, good-hearted nerd who just wants to do the right thing for the people around him. And Miles is coming from just the same place. So to see the two celebrated as Spidey in the same in-game universe, and see New York through Miles' eyes, is very exciting. Plus, I cannot wait to see some more of Miles' new suits and hear more of his music. It's gonna be really fun to see the world fall in love with him.
Peter Parker has been around for over 60 years. He has a tremendous audience. People love Peter Parker because of his universal appeal. Spider-Man is a character that is in people's hearts across multiple generations. Miles Morales is being introduced to the world, pretty recently, and the comics are a little under 10 years old. Into the Spider-Verse was a big hit, and our game sort of introduced Miles before that. But yeah, we're letting the world get to learn to love Miles Morales. So us recognizing that, of course, Peter is going to have the deeper love connection. We believe this game has an opportunity to open up their hearts to a new hero, and Miles is a super aspirational kid, someone that we hope people look up to. I'm excited to see, even though he might have self-doubts at the top, ultimately the journey is him gaining confidence and understanding who he is as a person.
A hero's just someone who doesn't give up. Your dad said that. He was right. Now it's your turn. Go be a hero, Miles.
So, will you be picking up Spider-Man Miles Morales? We'll be covering the game in more detail in the lead up to the PS5 launch. So do stay tuned and subscribe to Eurogamer for more daily videos. Oh, and by the way, Insomniac, it's a Spider-Cat spin-off next, right? Good. We'll see you in East Harlem. Bye!